Okay, welcome back. Let's get into making our inner container here. So I'm just going to highlight this area. I'm just going to do a little undo-y here. And okay, this is the area that we want to cover. And I'm just going to remove the fill here. So this outer area. So this outer area is going to run all the way down the page. And so we're going to recreate this inner area on every single section here because we have background color that spills outside of this area. So this is going to be called like our content area, essentially. And so the first thing we need to do is figure out how wide this design is. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on that box that I just made. And then down here in our transform inspector, we're going to see that the width is 2864. And I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to go to our pixel and rem converter. And we're still set at 32 because we're working off our 4K design. And I'm going to put 2864 in here. And it's going to give us a size of 89.5 rem. So what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to go to our bodies style sheet. So the body file is what I kind of like to use for, well, the body stuff and like stuff that kind of applies to the entire document. And we're going to add a new class called content. Okay. And we're going to set the width of this area to be 89.5 rem. And we want the width of this area to always be 100%. I guess technically we should say that this should be max width. So this means that it will never take up more than 89.5 rems worth of space. But if the screen gets smaller, it will just take up 100% of the width that is actually there. Okay, so what we can now come in here and do is we can add a div class container or content. Okay. And we'll just wrap this around here like so. So let's go ahead and take a look at our document. And not much has really changed, honestly. If we right-click this, the page and you go to inspect, I'm using Firefox, but this works the same in Chrome-based browsers like Brave or Chromium or Chrome or Edge. Edge is a Chrome browser now. And most browsers these days are actually Chrome. Firefox is kind of the only one that's still left that's not Chrome. Or based on Chrome or Chromium. So you're going to have an inspector tab, and inside the inspector we can inspect elements, right? So we see that we have our class section 1 that we wrote, and then we have our content. And by default, at least in Firefox, this inspector thing is on the bottom of the page. And in order to change it, you just click this these 3 dots, and then you can change where it's docked to. I like to have it docked on the right. I think that's the most convenient way to work with it. But feel free to do whatever works for you. And I'm just going to open this up some. And honestly, it looks... I'm just going to put this on the bottom just this once, just because occasionally it's a little better here. I see that when I hover over this content div, we can see that there's this blue highlighted area, and that shows us how wide that div is. So this div is already set up, but it's not in the right part of the page. It's stuck on the left side of the page, and that's not where we want it. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to introduce a new class. We're going to need a class that essentially centers this div. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a new class just called section, and this class will be applied to all the different sections as we build out. So we'll go to body here, and we'll create a section class. And just for the sake of everything, I'm just going to put it on top of this. And I'm going to introduce you to Flexbox. Now, Flexbox is relatively, I shouldn't say it's relatively new. It's new considering how old web browsers are. Older web browsers like Internet Explorer 10 and even I think some of 11 didn't have full support for it. And anything before that definitely didn't have support for it. And so you used to have to do things in really different ways. But Flexbox is a handy way that allows us to essentially position things with relative ease with CSS. So if you want to know more about Flexbox, you could just Google for Flexbox, but basically I'm going to take you through the properties. So the most important one is the display property. And we can see in the demo here, we have Flex. This activates essentially the Flexbox mode is by using display Flex. There are many other values. Display block is an example. As we see, it's referring to this outer line. Essentially, when something is display block, it acts like a block across the entire available width of the screen or area that, for example, an element can expand to. Inline block is another one that you would use a lot, and basically it allows you to stack things next to each other, like blocks that are inline. Like imagine you took two bricks and laid them next to each other. That's essentially what inline block is like. And then there's display none, and that just means we want to hide whatever has this value on it. Display and doesn't show at all. And Flex activates Flex mode. And then there's grid, which activates grid. Now, we're not going to really use grid ever, so I just don't find it very useful ever. There are some rare cases where it is good, but in this tutorial, I don't think we're going to use it at all. We want to focus on display Flex. So in order to activate Flexbox, we're going to use display Flex. And then there's a property called flex direction. Okay, so typically you want to put things, for example, in a row. This is kind of like using inline block, but with Flexbox. So I can put items next to each other in a row. And then there's columns, and I can stack items on top of each other. And then there are a few other ones, but generally you're going to use row and you're going to use column like 99% of the time. So these are the ones you really need to know about. So in this particular case, when I look at my screen here, I see where this div is. And I mean, I'm not going to stack things really on top of each other. I'm really trying to center this content div. So flex direction should be row. And then the next property we want to look at here is justify content, which is another flex property. And so you can see here, you can have like justify start, which starts at the start of the flex area. Center, we'll put in the center of the flex area. Space between, space around, space evenly. I think these are kind of like the ones you use the most. And there's more documentation down here. We're going to do a lot of work with this. You're going to know all these by the time we're done with this. And so we just want to justify the content to the center. And I'm going to save this. And then we're going to go back and we're going to look at our screen here. And I'm going to come down to our content here. And as we can see here, our div is now in the center. So we used Flexbox on this section area. And we can see it by clicking on this section area. And I'm just going to switch my inspector back to the right side. And we can see down here under the section class, here's the CSS that we wrote. Okay. And that's really all that is to that. That's your first introductory Flexbox lesson. And we're going to stop the recording here and go on to the next.